The Psalter reading is Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to thee, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let thy ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If thou, O Lord, should mark iniquities, Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with thee, that thou mayest be feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plenteous redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
A couple of years ago, I started my sermon by telling you about one of my closest friends who he just vanished. I texted him, didn't hear back, called him, left voicemail, didn't hear back. I checked in, another friend or two was having the same experience. Finally reached out to his wife. She said, I'm sorry. She said, I'll have him call you. He called me and said, come on over. I went to his house, and he said, I'm sorry. I fell in a hole. I'm sorry. I fell in a hole. I said to him, dude, next time you fall in a hole, you call me and I'll come pull you out of the hole. Now, when I told this in the sermon, people immediately leaped on this and told me what I wish they'd told me before the service, which is, you remember the scene from The West Wing? Oh, I did as soon as they said it. This is where Josh is beginning to show signs of struggling with alcoholism, and Leo says to him, let me tell you a story. There's a guy that fell in a hole, and the doctor came by and he said, doctor, can you help me? The doctor said, sure. He wrote a prescription, dropped it down in the hole. Priest comes by, he says, Father, can you help me? And the priest says, sure. He writes out a prayer and drops it down in the hole. Friend comes by and he says, friend, can you help me? And the friend jumped down in the hole. And he said, oh, that's stupid. Now both of us are down in the hole. But the friend says, yeah, but I've been in this hole before. I know the way out. I know the way out. I should add that actually what I said to my friend after I said, I'll pull you out of the hole, the years have taught me to be a little bit wiser than that. I said, or I'll just climb down in the hole and be there with you. There's some holes that are like that, right? We want, oh, just pull me out of the hole. But some holes, I mean, what would it be? Chronic illness. It's turned out to be his situation. Death is coming. You're just on a hole. We're not alone in the hole. And the psalm says, out of the depths I cry to you. It doesn't specify what those depths are. And that invites us to fill in the blank. You know, what are your depths? What are the depths of other people that you know? It could be the pits of depression. Some relationships, a marriage can be like that. You know, you look happy and you go out in public and you pretend, but it really feels like you're in some deep, dark hole. For some people, their jobs, they may be well compensated, but the job feels like it's this dark pit that I go to every day. It could be a cancer diagnosis. I have a friend right now who has realized and been told by his doctor that he is slipping into dementia. There's a dark hole. And then we can name places where people are in dark holes, East Palestine, Ohio, or Kiev. And those things remind us that the holes that we fall into aren't just personal. They're bigger than just a person. We live in a world that's fallen. We live in a world that's fallen into a hole. Lisa and I watched a documentary the other night that was absolutely wonderful. It's by a guy named Wim Wenders, and it's called Salt of the Earth. I would commend it to you. It's about the story, the career of a photographer whose name I'll probably mispronounce, Portuguese name, Sebastião Salgado. He's a Brazilian photographer, and the documentary begins when he goes to a gold mine in Brazil. The gold mine is called Serra Pelada, and there's a photo of it by this photographer on the front of your bulletin. And I studied this thing, and the way it worked is that in 1979, not ancient history, but in 1979, somebody discovered a chunk of gold. And so within a week, there were 20,000 people who had materialized there, digging into the ground. That hole that you see on the bulletin, in 1979, that was flat ground. So 20,000 people showed up, and more later, and they began to dig down into the ground, one bag at a time. After a while, they had to put ladders down. Then they had to put ladders below the ladders. And the hole eventually came to be 200 meters deep that they had dug down into the ground. The people in it looked like ants in an anthill. What Salgado said is this. He said, when I reached the edge of that enormous hole for the first time, every hair on my body stood on end. Here, in a split second, I saw unfolding before me the entire history of mankind, the building of the pyramids, the Tower of Babel, the mines of King Solomon. You could not hear a single machine, only the babble of 50,000 people in one huge hole. I had returned to the dawn of time. You know, he took photos of the people desperately in their dirty, they had to close this mine. It wasn't a mine, right? It was just a hole that people dug. They had to close it 7 years later. Because there were murders and theft, and there was prostitution, and it turned out whatever the process is to deal with gold there involves mercury, and so mercury was getting into the water, and it was killing the fish and the wildlife, and they had to shut the mine down after this. One of the things that Salgado said about that, he said, all that earth had to be removed. He said, when I first got there, I had the impression that I was looking at the work of slaves. So it turned out there was not one slave in that hole, then he adds, except slaves to the idea of getting rich. I love that. I love that. Seems to be an image of our fallen world, doesn't it? Out of the depths I cry, out of the depths we cry, out of the depths the world cries. It says some good can come from holes, all right? We know this. I looked out my front yard. Some bulbs were planted there. You dig a hole, you plant a bulb, pretty flowers come up now. Like, oh, that's how that works. It's cool. John Wesley. He'd fallen into a hole, his Aldersgate experience, the Methodists love to talk about, from May 24, 1738. He was at a very dark point indeed. He snuck in the back of a church and he heard the choir singing this psalm, out of the depths I cry to thee. He came to an awareness of God's grace, good coming out of the hole. Joseph's brothers, right? They were so jealous of him because their father gave him like the cool coat. And so they threw him into a pit and thought, we're done with him. But it's a good thing they threw him into a pit, because some Midianite traders came along and he took him to Egypt, and he became the most powerful man in Egypt and saved the lives of the whole world. Good coming out of a hole. Think about our building project here. It is good to see something now. For the longest time, people would say, hey, how's your construction project? And I'd kind of growl a little and say, I think it's only a destruction project. They don't seem to be building anything. They're just like, well, at some point, the building supervisor showed me what was down in the hole. It's pretty interesting. It wasn't just demolition down into the hole. They were actually building some amazing things that you actually need for a building to stand up. That's how it works, right? There's got to be all this stuff in it. Then, and only then, can the steel come up. That's why we call it the Center of Hope. It's why our campaign is called Hope is Here. When you invest in this project, that is a not very subtle hint, is it? Hint, hint. When you invest in this building project, some of you have not. You still may. Some of you could dig a little deeper. Inflation about killed us last year. When you invest in this project, it's a symbol of hope. People who drive by, people think the church is dying in our world. Well, look what we got going on. There's hope. There is a God. There's a church that's got some life. We're going to make a difference in the world. And then even better, I have to say, on Friday, I went out to our opening Habitat workday. If you haven't tracked this, out on Morrisfield Road near the airport, we are building 39 homes, a neighborhood. It's just the coolest thing. I'm so proud to be part of a church that would dare to do something that audacious and transformative. And what's cool about it right now is some of they progress differently, right? So we had people hammering in houses that they've already come up out of the hole, but others that they're just digging the holes where it's going to be a house one day. That's how all homes work, right? It's a hole, but then a home comes out of the hole. Good, comes out of hole. Psalm 130. Which Stephanie read for us, is one of what the church calls the seven penitential Psalms. We're in the season of Lent, a season of penitence. The seven penitential Psalms are designed and selected to be something of an answer to what we call the seven deadly sins. You know, the church has always warned that there are seven sins that will be the undoing of your soul. And we have to contemplate these because they sound like the good life in America, what everybody's headed for. But those seven deadly sins, think gluttony, lust, sloth, pride, envy, so on. Like, that's what we're trying to get in America. It will be the undoing of your soul. Gandhi heard about the seven deadly sins, and I love this. He said there actually are also, building on top of that, seven social sins, seven things that go wrong in society. And they are, listen to this list: wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, politics without principle. If I listen to that list and think about the seven deadly sins, I just can only say, ouch. We're a broken people. We are a broken world. And how does God respond to this? I think I grew up thinking, well, sin is God's got some rules, and you break the rules, and God is very angry at you for breaking those rules. I've said to you before, I don't think it's that way. I think it's more, in my best days as a parent, when my kids would do something stupid, God, I would just, I had bad days, I might holler at them, and I didn't mean to. My better days, though, I would just look at them and say, Where'd that come from? Is this who you want to be? Is this the kind of life that you want to have? Don't you want to do better, be better? Or maybe it's like, I told this on Ash Wednesday. I want to repeat it because it fits. I had a dog. My first church was out in the country, and the parsonage backed up to a huge forest. I had a dog named Abigail, and I loved to let her out in the afternoon. She would just run through the woods and frolic. She just had such a blast, and then she would come home for dinner. Well, one day she didn't come home for dinner. So I went back into the woods to try to find her, and I heard a yelping, and I followed the sound of the yelping, and down in a little ravine, there was Abigail. Somebody years before evidently had a barbed wire fence there and had fallen down in the leaves, and of course she'd gotten tangled in that barbed wire. And she was struggling to get out, and of course the harder she struggled, the worse it lacerated her skin, her fur, and I couldn't just yank her out of there, right? What I had to do is just pet her and say, Abby, shh. Abby, just be still, be still. Trust me. I finally got her settled down, and I could pull those barbs out of her skin, and then I picked her up and took her back to the house and fed her dinner. She didn't scarf it down like she usually would. She ate gingerly. It was a beautiful thing. God sees us. Like we're can't extricate ourselves from this mess that we find ourselves in, and God says, be still, let me liberate you from this. In 1967, the Beatles came out with a song called Fixing a Hole. Paul McCartney sang, I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in. I remember saying to one of my friends, I bet Paul McCartney ain't fixed any hole in a long period of time. But Jesus did, right? Jesus was a builder. He was a carpenter. I bet the times came when Mary said, son, there's a leak. The water's getting in. And Jesus would fix the hole. His life was all about fixing holes or filling holes, right? Filling the holes into which we've fallen. I mean, think about this at the Last Supper. Maundy Thursday's tracking. In a week and a half, we'll be there. And at that Last Supper, I think it's so beautiful. Jesus come into our hole to pull us out, to save us. And I think when he broke that bread for the Passover meal, I just firmly believe that when he looked at that broken bread, he got a glimpse of what was about to happen to his pure, holy body. And I think when he looked into that cup of the red wine, he had a vision of his own blood being shed soon. You know, he went out from that supper to the Garden of Gethsemane, and we forget that they arrested him. They threw him in jail overnight before they tried him on Good Friday. In that jail, there's a place in Jerusalem that we take groups to. We think this may well have been the jail where Jesus was. You and I think jail, like, you know, bars with lights, but for Jesus it would have been this dark stone pit, and they would have just thrown him down into the pit. And down there it's pitch black dark. I take groups there, we turn the lights off. It's pitch black dark. It's chilly. It's hard. Jesus spent that night in that darkest pit because he came into all of our dark places, into all of our pits. There's no hole that is too deep for Jesus. There's no sin that is too great. There's no brokenness that is too broken. There's no addiction that is too strong. Jesus hears our cry out of the depths. I cry to you, O Lord, and there he is with us. It takes time. The psalm says, my soul waits for the Lord. Like, we want to pray, and Jesus, let's do this in the next 5 minutes. Come on, answer my prayer. But it takes time, and that's good for us. All good things take time. All good things require waiting. We wait for the Lord, trusting that, like a bulb coming out of the ground and becoming a beautiful flower, like a church coming up, becoming a wonderful building, like a home coming up out of just a hole in the ground. Life, it's coming. It's God's. God's promised. God won't let us down. God comes down to lift us up. Thanks be to God.